Uldale Valley is surrounded by steep hills and consists of a string of farms and cottages stretching along the River Ellen. It lies on the edge of the northern fells of the Lake District, several miles north of Keswick. The church here was built in the 12th century, though not much remains of the original fabric, and the details of any changes before the 18th century are sketchy. The chancel arch inside is late 15th or early 16th century, and must have replaced a Norman arch. Whether the original was becoming unsafe or actually collapsed is not known, but this arch is the oldest visible part of the current church. In fact, following recent work, the interior is now very different in appearance, with a wooden floor and individual chairs, allowing for greater flexibility. In 1703, Bishop Nicholson visited and recorded that there were no altar rails. The chancel was crowded with seats, with the south window half walled up, and the nave looked dark. In 1730, the church, or at least the nave, was rebuilt, paid for entirely by the inhabitants of the parish. Some of the fabric of the old building was retained, especially in the north wall, the west wall, and around the chancel arch. The bellcot, which had been situated between the nave and the chancel, was moved to the west end. Some sources say this happened much later, but a drawing from before 1837 shows the bellcot at the west end. The new nave windows are clearly Georgian in style. The same drawing shows there were shutters on the windows, which were still there in a photograph of the late 19th or early 20th century. The font inside the church appears to date from this rebuild, though it sits on an ancient base. The new flooring has been constructed to accommodate it. A little over a century later, in 1837, the chancel was rebuilt, and a vestry added on the north side. A plaque above the vestry door, outside, commemorates the work done. The windows in the chancel are copies of the Georgian windows of the nave. Before this work, there was a small square window on the south side. The east window is in the decorated style, so much older than the rebuild. It might have been from the original chancel, or it may have come from another church. The stained glass bears the initials of Joseph Gilbanks, who paid for the work to be done. He is also recorded as having been allotted a seat in the gallery at the west end. This record is the only evidence that a gallery was ever in place, so when it was added or taken away is unknown. In 1855, the nave was re-roofed and given a new plaster ceiling inside. Soon after this, the story of the church gets a little complicated. In 1869, a new church was built much closer to the little village of Uldale. St. John the Evangelist, with its spire, dominated the landscape from all directions and towered over the houses. The old church was retained, but was no longer the main place of worship. A directory published in 1901 states that a divine service was still held in the old church once a month during the summer. The same year the directory was published, the box pews were taken out and new seating was installed. A watercolour on the wall of the church shows how the interior would have looked at this time. The commandment boards, the creed and the Lord's Prayer were removed, and so was the pulpit, though no replacement was given. A new altar and credence table were installed, along with a new lectern. In 1914, the plaster ceiling of the nave was removed, and a new open-beamed roof structure put in place. The following year, the lich gate was erected. All this seems a lot of work for a building that was more or less disused at this time. This may have something to do with the fact that this graveyard had remained in use, and was in fact extended around 1911. In 1954, the church acquired new oak doors, following the demolition of St. Mary's Church in Carlisle, which had stood next to the cathedral. In 1957, the new church by the village was considered unsafe and closed, so worship returned to the older church. That same year, the graveyard was extended again. A couple of years later, the plaster on the south wall was replaced. It had been suffering from extreme damp. In 1961, a new pulpit was installed, finally replacing the one removed 60 years earlier. This, along with the fronts of the chancel pews given a few years later, was made using local craftwork. A description of the church written in 1959 had described the fronts of the chancel pews then as using 18th century panelling from the old chancel. In 1963, not even a century after its construction, the Church of St. John the Evangelist was demolished. There's very little evidence now that it ever existed, except for the enclosure wall and railings around what's now a playground. The font from that church can be seen near the Lich Gate in the graveyard at St. James. There are many interesting memorials to be found here. The oldest is a grave slab by the south boundary wall. It's to a rector of the 15th century, and the chalice can still just about be made out. On the south wall inside is the Roll of Honour for the First World War, listing all the local men who served, including the two who were killed, Private Wood and Gunner Graham. On the north side of the chancel there are plaques to members of the Gilbanks family. The larger one is to Joseph Gilbanks, who paid for the 1837 work to be carried out. On the west wall is a tablet to Thomas Tomlinson, who was master of Uldale Grammar School. He emigrated to North Carolina in around 1763. He was a successful merchant there and died in 1802, aged 71, leaving money in his will to Uldale School and the poor of the area. In the treasury at Carlisle Cathedral are two items belonging to Uldale Church. One is an Elizabethan silver chalice of around 1571. The other is a 14th or 15th century chalice case made of boiled leather. Only one other such case is known to exist, and that's in the British Museum. In the early 21st century, a new organ was given to the church in memory of Catherine and John Wiles. The chair to the south side of the altar was also given in memory of Catherine. In 2018, the church closed for repair work to be carried out. For various reasons, this work was not completed until 2024, when the church finally opened again for services. A small kitchenette was installed at the west end, as well as a disabled access toilet where the vestry had been. The church was given a new wooden floor and the old benches taken out and replaced by individual chairs. Double glazing panels were installed on all the windows and radiators added along the walls. A handrail was also added to the step up from the nave to the chancel. All this gives the interior of this church a very modern feeling, while outside the low whitewashed building sits in harmony with the landscape as it has done for hundreds of years.